it's really nice to be here. Met Samantha because she read an article that I wrote that Salon published, which was very unlikely sort of article for them to publish because they're a political magazine. And this was me writing about dealing with the afterlife and understanding the nature of the coming to terms with the fact that communication, discarnate communication, in other words, communication between us and loved ones who have passed on is possible. I had been a rabid atheist. I call myself a lapsed atheist now. And it took me quite some time to come to terms with the things that were going on after my fiance died. Samantha invited me to join the Facebook group, and I had scanned it one day, and I noticed that there was quite a lot of people wondering, which is an obvious thing to wonder about. Is it a sign? Is it not a sign? What's a sign? All of this kind of thing. There's so much sort of confusion out there about what is and isn't a sign and how to recognize them and what's our imagination and what's really happening. So I'm hoping that whatever I share here this morning is helpful to you all. What I'd like to just sort of start with first is, and forgive me if I'm talking to you and you've heard all this before, but this is all stuff that was very sort of important to me, or stuff that I ran into when my fiance died. So I thought it's just for anyone who hasn't run into it, I just thought I would cover this. So the first thing I'm going to say is there are no afterlife experts. I can't tell you the amount of times I've gotten LinkedIn Connect requests from people who say they're afterlife experts. The truth is that nobody knows everything about the afterlife, unless perhaps you're in the afterlife. So I would say if you're experiencing some of the things I experienced, which was, all these superstitions and scary things about, oh, you have to move, sort of physical things, physical world things like, oh, you have to move on. Have any of you, you can type in the chat box also, feel free if you're going, but have any of you heard this, people telling you all the time, oh no, you have to move on? And yeah, it happens a lot. And then there's the people who do believe in the afterlife, and you're trying to say, but he's still here or she's still here, and I'm very much aware of their presence, and if that was all wrong, why would I be aware of their presence? And you're trying to, and of course everybody thinks you're just grief, this is grief-induced delusion, but in your heart this is going on. And then there's the issue of the people who do believe in the afterlife, bring a lot of superstitions to it. So in other words, you're holding him back, or you're holding her back, or she can't go into the light, or your grief is too, you're harming him or her, and all this. Any of you heard this sort of stuff? Yeah. So, I have my fiance passed the spirit world 8 years ago, and I can honestly say what I have learned in the last 8 years is that 90% of what people have told me is absolute nonsense. And so what I will say is nobody knows, not me, not anyone, no one knows for sure what it's like in the afterlife. Now, what I know from my own experience of working with a medium, I don't know, my background is that I was always aware of something, but as a child, and then when I got into my teens, of course, I was like, more interested in teen stuff. I won't go into the details, and I just thought this was a whole load of bunk. And I had grown up in Ireland in a Catholic country, and as soon as I was 17 and got away from the nuns, that was it. I never walked into a church again. I was just too delighted to get away from it. So I had no interest in any of this, and I was very much an atheist and a pragmatist. And so actually was my fiance. So it was very unusual for us of anybody to be like the two that now are in this situation. But I, like you, had to deal with, even from ordinary people, from people who believed, from people who didn't believe, from mediums even, this idea of, oh, you've got to move on, you got to find someone else, you got, this kind of thing. Now, what I will say to that is nobody's holding anybody back. Nobody in the spirit world is holding anybody back or is being held back by their spouse here any more than they were not held back by their spouse when they were walking around on 2 feet. Does that make sense? Okay. So I can't see all your faces here because a lot of your cameras aren't on, but I can see some smiley faces. So I'm sure a lot of you have run into this too. If your loved one is in the spirit world, your loved one is the same person in the spirit world that they were here. So you don't suddenly die and go into a light, if you go into a light, and spread wings, right? Your loved one is still the same person they were. I'm very much into sort of science and the science of consciousness theory and a lot of the theories that are coming out around this. I am very rational when it comes to this sort of thing, but I can honestly say, and I know this from communicating with thousands of people for other people, and I know this from my own ongoing relationship, is that we continue to grow in the afterlife. We can choose to grow here while we're here. We can choose to grow there while we're there, or we can choose not to grow either place. That's our choice, but somebody else cannot tell us that we are not doing that. We know that ourselves, right? When people say, now, when I say that, like I see with my partner, for instance, that I've had to undergo a radical awakening since he got to the spirit world. And I do believe, and I can see, I have over the course of the last 8 years seen small changes in him progressively, but the same way as I would have seen them progressively over 8 years had he still been here. So for me, the line between incarnate consciousness, which is our consciousness while it's attached to our brain, and discarnate consciousness, which is when our brain no longer exists, but our consciousness still does, is just a continuity. Nobody makes some radical change. There's no radical change. I mean, obviously, the spirit world we know doesn't have the same physicality, we understand, as this world, but still the person is the same person. And the person is the same person who will choose to grow emotionally and spiritually in the spirit world or not, depending on their personality. They don't become a different person, you know? So for instance, both my parents have since passed the spirit world. My mother was a warrior. She was really fierce. Oh my God, all I have to do is say, Mom, I can feel my mother there, because she's that type of person. She's just formidable, you know? My father is much more laid back. So I actually have to go I have to go, Dad, where are you? And it takes longer, like it takes a few minutes for me to feel my mother like that, because that's just their personalities. So, and this is something I want to talk about a little later when we get to talk about the signs, but the same goes also for not just your spouse or your partner, but anybody in the spirit world, your parents, anybody you loved will walk with you. And I have to stress, they're not with you every single minute of the day, right? But then they weren't with you every single minute of the day when they were here either, right? So this is another thing that comes back to this idea of people saying, hold them back. It's like, what, are we in school? Well, we're going to have to stay back a grade. I mean, I don't even get this. So like, they will be with you. You will have your independent life. They have their independent life. And then there's the life you have together, right? The way it was here, right? Does that make sense? And so when people say hold them back, it's like, first of all, when do you think about your loved one the most? When they've just passed, right? The months, the first year probably, is you're probably thinking about them every single day, right? Now, what I know about the spirit world is that if we have a thought about our loved one in the spirit world, they can feel it, because it's very much sort of, it's telepathic communication. If we're thinking about them, they can feel it. Have you ever had a situation where you're just washing the dishes, or you're running for the subway, or you're just doing normal things in your day, and then all of a sudden they just kind of randomly pop into your head, right? And we think we've just thought about them. Well, what's actually happened most likely is they just thought about us. And we felt their thought the same way they can feel, because the connection is there. It's the love between you that makes this possible. So they can feel us like that when we think about them, and vice versa. And this is how this is always there. It's like sending text messages throughout the day. you know? It's like you turn your thoughts to them, they can hear you. They turn their thoughts to us, we can hear them. But we're both, so there's nothing unhealthy about this. This is why I've never understood why people say, oh, you got to move on, you know? It's like, well, you know, this is just the same as it always was. A lot of it comes from people just not understanding. A lot of it comes from superstition. You know, a lot of it comes from this notion that the afterlife is someplace else. Just this idea that there's a geography. Well, we know there's no geography. So if we get into more of a progressive way of thinking of what we know in our modern, in the 21st century, a lot of that doesn't make sense. You know, a lot of when we understand now quantum computing, quantum physics, we understand consciousness a bit better than we did before. We start to realize that a lot of what we have been taught over the ages for millennia was just sort of symbolic references that people at that time could understand. That's why we use symbols, right? That's what writing is, a symbol. We can use symbols to convey meaning, but those symbols need to change and our understanding needs to update. And a lot of people still don't understand it, or they just don't put a lot of time and effort or thought into it. But when your loved one dies, you do, right? When we're grieving. And part of, I think, the reason why people are always like, you've got to move on is because people are so uncomfortable with grief, right? They, all of a sudden you realize people, you're so in the dumps for so long that now all of a sudden people, oh, they are busy when you want to talk to them, or they're rationing you or something. But the truth is that we're in a society that's very uncomfortable with grief. And what people want to do is they think, oh, you need to kind of get over it and move on. What they don't realize is you never get over grief, right? You learn to live differently with it. Now, just because we're grieving now and in a very sad and bad and low state doesn't mean we're always going to be in that type of grief, but the grief will change over time. But the loss will always be a loss. You know, even if you are communicating and even if you are aware of your loved one in the spirit world, their physical presence is not there. So just their physical presence is a loss. Does that make sense to everybody when I say that? So the relationship is different. So it is different. You know, there is the loss of their physical presence. We do need to grieve that. But when people say, oh yeah, you need to get over it, and you don't get over grief, you don't get over loss, you learn to live with it. You become a different person, it becomes part of you. You become a different person because of it. Not a bad person, I mean, sometimes a better person, you know, sometimes you can become more compassionate or, you know, more humble or whatever for it. But for the most part, it just takes time. And you need to give yourself that time, even if other people don't. So I know from my own experience, not just from my fiance passing, I've had 7 people die in the last 8 years close to me. Every time somebody passes, initially you're thinking about them all the time, right? Does everyone experience that? And over time, it's sort of, you're not thinking about, you get to more like the way it was when they were alive, where you get on with your day and you think about them here and there throughout your day, but it's not this constant loop, right? Now, can you honestly tell me that your loved one went to the spirit world and knows you're grieving here and can feel you thinking about them all the time and is going, you're holding me back? Right? What are they saying? They're right there with you because they've got their own form of grief too, and they love you and they want to make you feel better because that's what they would have done in person, right? So what I will say to you about that is at some point we do need to, we want to be careful that grief doesn't turn into some sort of serious depression, right? But we do also need to grieve. And if it gets to a point where 6 months, a year is going on and you're still as bereft then as you were the day after or the week after, then you probably do need to go, I would suggest seeing a counselor, talking about it, because you probably have slipped into a depression that you just need some help with, you know. But the thing is that we do need time to grieve, and we all grieve in our own way. And some people will, you know, men grieve very differently from women, in my experience. And we do need to give ourselves that time to grieve and to heal. But we just want to be careful that we don't stay in a dysfunctional or debilitating state for too long. But you are the judge of that, right? And every loss is different. The loss of a child is very different from the loss of a grandparent. So you just need to give yourself that sort of self-compassion to deal with that. Now, I will say, as part of the grieving process, we probably do want to get to a point where we're able to just incorporate the new form of the relationship we have with our spirit, with our loved one, into our lives the way it is now. So we don't want to be stuck on the way it was. Does this make sense? We really want to, at some point in our grieving process, we will start to gradually start to think in terms of the relationship we have now, the life we have now without their physical presence, with their conscious presence. And that will sort of change over time. And we will get back to work, and we will get back to normal things, and we will get back to getting annoyed because somebody just took our seat in the subway and whatever, you know. But it becomes gradually, it's a gradual adjustment, and and it's a healthy adjustment once it is handled like that. Does this make sense to you? It's a subtle difference. What I want to do is sort of make you aware that you can't hold somebody back, but we shouldn't be probably thinking about them 24 hours a day a year after they're passed. So I'm not trying to rush anybody out, but I am saying when people say move on, I think they don't understand. I've always said I really can't stand that phrase personally. I prefer the phrase move forward. I move forward. I have moved forward with my fiance over the last 8 years, right? We would have moved forward had he still been here. It wouldn't be the same relationship today it was 8 years ago, even if he hadn't died, right? So this is just what I want to just stress, just to make sure we think of this in healthy terms, so that we can continue to live our lives and grow in our lives and just be with them in our lives in the type of relationship that is possible to have with them now. Does that make sense to anybody? Can I just anybody have any concerns or not understand anything I said there before I kind of move on? Because I know this is a big thing people run into with when you're kind of listening to people in the public there. Okay, no one's waving at me. All right. I just want to talk a little bit about the kind of signs that we get, because I know this can cause a lot of confusion. Now, before I start in on the big list is like trying to buy a dream dictionary. It's like you have these dreams. You actually need to intuitively sit with your own dreams, right, to interpret them. There's no point in running out and getting a dictionary to read up and see what somebody else decided hummingbird means, right? Does that make sense? It's a similar thing. This whole sign thing is your loved one in some way being able to manipulate the energy that's in we're all energy. Everything in the world, as you know, is energy. Being able to manipulate energy, and I do feel in a lot of times, it's not that they're moving things around or anything. I do feel like a lot of times, if you ever, and this has happened, I mean, I've got thousands of these stories, but have you ever noticed that suddenly you look somewhere and you see a picture that reminds you of them, or suddenly you are just in your own head, and then suddenly you start paying attention to what's around you and you hear a song that reminds you of them. Well, it's not that they got into the DJ booth, right, and got that song lined up in the player so that what they did was were aware of the song and then influenced your thoughts so that to get you to pay attention to something. So it's not just, they're also looking for opportunities to get your attention. Does this make sense? So people go, how could somebody get a record, get a song on? Well, no, they just knew the song was coming and brought your attention to it, right? They saw a movie that you went to see together, and they see an ad for it somewhere and they get your attention and you look there, right? They're not posting billboards. I mean, it's just not that ludicrous. People make this out to be sort of some nonsense. It's very, very simple. You're walking down the road, they see something that they know you'll associate with them, and they draw your attention to it. How simple is that? It's just a thought, right? It's like saying, hey, that's it. It's so simple. So a lot of the time, if we're running around going, where's the sign, where's the sign, where's the sign, we're what I call snatching. And it might not necessarily be them at all. But if we just get into a place, and on my website actually, which we can post in the Facebook group afterwards, there is a meditation called Sitting in the Power, which is a very intuitive meditation to allow you touch the power that allows you to connect with the presence. Now, you only want to do it 10 minutes a day. You don't want to be in this state all the time. You'd be picking up all sorts of rubbish from everybody. But it just allows you attune to that so that you can be more aware of when they're trying to communicate with you, right? Rather than run around like a crazy person going, oh, is that butterfly them, or is that hummingbird them, or whatever, right? You know? But I will talk about that again in a few minutes. What I do want to say is, like, obviously, I'm sure a lot of you have come across this, you know, a lot of the very common signs are things like butterflies, or things like feathers, or coins, or pebbles, things like this. So if anybody goes, oh, there's a butterfly, is that my loved one showing me a sign? Don't forget they can hear your thoughts. Ask them, right? So you don't have to go run around like this. Like I said, it's not a dream where you can go get a dictionary. So if somebody else says, you know, I have a friend who never saw a butterfly. She's actually a medium. She's never gotten a butterfly, you know, and now me on the other hand, being the skeptic I was, when my fiance died first, somebody said that to me, oh, you know, they'll often send you butterflies. And I'm like, what are you kidding me? Like, if you knew him, you would know. He was so sarcastic, and he was so dry, and he was so smart. I mean, if I saw a little butterfly dance in front of me, I would never associate that with him, because that was so not out of character for him, you know? Would you believe for the next week, everywhere I went, there were butterflies, everywhere. I mean, I must have saw about 15 butterflies a day. It got to the point, and then I was like, geez, there's an awful lot of butterflies around here all of a sudden. And they're still never connected with me. And then I was sitting on the beach, and a butterfly crashed into my head. I'm not joking, you crashed into my head. And I went, holy God, like, where are all these butterflies coming from? You know? And it was a couple of days later when I was in Virginia, I was sitting by a pool, and a little butterfly was hopping around a bush. And then I went, whoa, hang on, is this you sending butterflies? And a butterfly came and landed on my foot. Now, the thing was, and the reason I tell you that story is because him, what we call in Ireland, I don't know what they call it in America, they call it taking the piss. It's, you know, do you know what that is? He was like the world's best at taking the piss. And that's exactly what he was doing, taking the piss. I was like, oh, never. He was like, oh yeah, I'll show you, you know? And so, but this is what I mean. So the single butterfly would never have meant a thing to me, but you know, all the rest of it, I was like, oh, you know, you had to sort of go, wow, you know? So what I want to say is that a key part of recognizing signs is that there should be a feeling of the presence of your loved one there. And by all means, ask them, you know, like, show me something I understand, you know? So I won't go on more stories, but I hope that just sort of illustrates how, you know, the thing is. So another thing that happens is, you know, people get cardinals, jays, blue jays, you know, hummingbirds, things like that. Well, I've got a nest across the street of blue jays. Every morning I wake up, there's blue jays on my fire escape waiting for food, because I put bird seed out every day. I can assure you those blue jays are not a sign from the afterlife. They're just the blue jays looking for food, right? So again, you want to just go, where is the relevance of this to me? And that will give you that sort of, you really need to use your intuition. Your intuition is the language of the spirit, right? So it's all about intuition. So reflect, just reflect on what you've seen. Another quick story was, I was with a friend of mine out in California, and I hadn't seen him for a long time. And we sat down at LACMA, which is this little, there was a little park beside LACMA in Los Angeles. And we sit down under this tree in the middle of the summer. And as soon as we sit down, I see in my mind's eye this woman with blonde, white, curly hair, very thin woman in this blue dress with white flowers on it. She sits down with us. And I didn't know who she was. So, and I didn't want to just blurt out to my friend who didn't know that I had this ability, hey, there's a woman in a blue dress with white flowers sitting beside us. Do you know who she is? So I waited for a while until I'm trying to feel him out to see if he'd be receptive. And eventually an opportunity arose where I was able to say, hey, do you believe in this stuff? And it turned out he did. So I said, well, then in that case, there's this woman with white curly hair and a blue dress with white flowers sitting beside us. Or well, she's gone now. And as soon as I started telling him this, a hummingbird, and I got to be honest, I live in New York, I live in the Bronx in New York City. I don't see hummingbirds, right? So next thing, as I'm telling him this story of this woman who had been there, she just came and went, a hummingbird came and fluttered a couple of feet from our heads. And we were like, holy crap, you know, that's a hummingbird, is that crazy? And then it flew off. Now, I didn't know what that hummingbird was about. So I tell him this story. And I said, the woman's about 57. She had this, and he said, she had this white curly hair. And he said, well, it sounds actually like my friend's mother. She committed suicide last year. And she had peroxide blonde hair, looked white, and it was dead straight, but she was always curling it because she hated straight hair. And he said, and she was thin and she was that age, but he said, I don't know about the blue dress with white flowers. I'll have to ask my friend. And then I was like, oh boy, don't ask your friend because, you know, you don't want to go saying, hey, you just sat beside my friend in Lockma, you know. So anyway, he said, no, I'll deal with it. So that evening he called me and he'd gone over to his friend's house. It turned out it was the friend's mother's 1-year anniversary. And the daughter had gone back to the house and was clearing out the wardrobe because it was the 1 year, you know. And it turned out that her mother's favorite dress was a blue dress with white flowers. And she had taken it out that afternoon when she was clearing the wardrobe out when we were in Lockma and tried it on, you know. And so they ran down to tell the father this because the two of them, the father and the daughter, had never really recovered from the mother's suicide, you know. So they ran down to tell the father this story, this crazy story about, you know, and he said, you know, she loved hummingbirds and the hummingbird feeders were all still hanging in the garden, you know. So what I'm saying is that the power of the spirit world is phenomenal to get their message across. So you don't have to read a book or go, was that this or that? Like I say, that hummingbird was clearly that woman, but my blue jays clearly are just blue jays, right? So the thing is that it's very much an intuitive language. So to begin to understand how your loved one is communicating with you, it really starts with developing your own intuition, because then you'll be able to see their personality in the messages that they are giving you. And those messages then can get more sophisticated because they're very much aware of what's going on in your life and they want to help you just as they wanted to help you while they were here, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Have I just confused everyone? Everyone's going, I don't know how to develop my intuition. You know, very easy. I actually teach a course in it. Maybe we'll do it sometime. So anyway, other things besides the little animals and creatures, of course, are dreams. You know, where now I will say there is a difference between a regular dream and a visitation dream. And this is something a lot of people ask, like, did I just dream about my loved one or was that just an annual dream? A visitation dream has a different quality to a regular dream, you know? So you know, a regular dream is softer, it's sort of ambivalent, it doesn't make any sense, right? A visitation dream, which is where they're actually appearing to you in the dream or in that altered state. All communication with the spirit world happens in an altered state. Mediumship, all the work I do first requires getting into an altered state to make it happen. The dream is a natural altered state. That hypnagogic time between when you're sleeping and waking up is an altered state. Often a lot of communication will happen in that time too. You might see an image or hear something. And that's the time it's easiest for them to communicate with you because your head is not, you know, all in the day, right? It's too noisy. But that time is very quiet. It's a very easy time for for them to communicate. So if you get a dream and it has a different quality to it, or it just feels different somehow, have any of you had that where you get a dream and you feel, oh, that just felt kind of like not like a regular dream? That's a visitation dream. There's a different quality to it. It's going to be probably more colorful, or it's going to have a real quality to it, or you're going to feel like you're carried along with it, you know, but there will be those different qualities, and that's definitely a visitation dream. If you have one of those, pay attention, write it down, write everything you can remember down, pay attention to it, because there is going to be an awful lot of information in that dream. Again, the most common message and the first message your loved one is going to come to you is just, I am here, I love you, I did not die. That is the most fundamental message. That's the reason for the signs, right? But as you continue your relationship, they will actually, just as they did here, be part of your ongoing life. Now, and I'm not talking about dependency. I'm not talking about people say, oh, you're just dependent. You're not. This is not dependency. This is, I hope you can see the difference between a natural, ongoing, moving forward in this relationship sort of situation and this sort of clinging dependency. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not, I don't think, what any of us here are thinking. Is that right? So, you know, and ask for help. The other thing too is, and I didn't actually just realize, I remember this now, helpful people. You ask for help, helpful people will appear, right? It's them helping you. So it's not like, oh, I need to buy a house, give me a lottery ticket to win a house. It could be just that all of a sudden they put a really kick-ass real estate agent in front of you, right? Like there's nothing magical about this, right? This is very natural stuff. And so you'll often find that helpful people will show up just when you ask for help. The key is you have to ask. You can't assume they can read your mind, but they can't, from what I understand, there's certain laws and there's certain rules, and that is that they can't manipulate you like a puppet. You have free will. So if you need help, you need to ask them for help. And believe me, they will find a way to help you. And one of the ways they will find ways to help you is put helpful people or helpful information in your path, you know? And so just pay attention to that as well. And you'll know. Usually if you've asked, something shows up. Yeah, well, I know who that was, you know? I had a really bad legal problem one time. I was in a contract to teach a course and they gave me a horrible time and I wanted out of it. And it was causing me so much stress. And I said to my friends, oh, please help me with this, you know? And 8 o'clock at night, I got a phone call from a union rep saying they were just calling members just because he was in the writers union, calling members to just check in, see if the union was giving them everything they needed. And I said, well, unless you've got a legal department, no. And they said, oh, we do. And gave me the number for the legal department. And I called the legal department the next day and they looked over my contract and helped me get out of it. So you see what I mean? It's not that, you know, it's just very down to earth, practical stuff just will show up. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, okay, cool. Right. Now, apparitions, people get them. I very rarely get them. I got them sort of early on. Usually when I see something, I see it in my mind's eye. It's a clairvoyant ability, but people do see apparitions. I did see a leg walking across the floor one time. It was like it had stuck through, you know, like stuck it through a curtain or something. And I just saw part of the leg take a couple of steps and disappear. And I thought that was interesting, you know. I used to see black figures, solid black figures. I don't see them anymore, but sometimes you will see this, or you'll see something out of the corner of your eye. Now, the thing about the corner of your eye, if you're tired, it's your eye will actually play on you that way. Mostly apparitions, you'll see frontal vision where you're actually aware of them. You know, because it's very easy to think you saw something out of the corner of your eye, particularly when you're tired. But if somebody wants to get your attention, they'll stick it in front of you. So generally an apparition, you'll see it in front of you. I think it seems to take a phenomenal amount of energy. I don't think it's all that common. I certainly don't see it very much, you know. Now, a couple of things, as I already mentioned, suddenly thinking about them. The next time, if you just suddenly find you're completely preoccupied in a task and then they pop into your head, it's a very good chance that was them thinking about you in that moment and you felt their thought. Okay. A lot of you, I'm sure, just sense their presence. especially probably when you're falling asleep at night, when you're waking up in the morning, you can swear they're in the bed beside you, you can feel them behind you or whatever. Again, it's because, like I said, that hypnagogic state is an altered state, and it's much, your cognitive brain is kind of wound down, it's out of the way, and it's much easier for you to sense in that state. It's how mediums work, get into that state, you know. Does that make sense to everybody there? Yeah, okay, cool. You know, oh, another one that's really common that I get all the time and I still get is feeling like there's cobwebs or somebody touching your face, right? Get a lot of you get that. Or feathers, like you feel like there's a feather on your face. I get it around my eyes a lot still, actually. Or you get tingles, you know. So yeah. So, and I notice this sometimes, and I know somebody's listening in. So if I'm looping in my head on something, you know, and all of a sudden I'll feel tingles on, especially if I'm lying in bed at night, just looping on something in the day. All of a sudden I'll feel these like little cobwebs, you know, or feathers around my eyes or my face, or tingles. And I go, who's listening? You know, like I'm thinking I'm just ranting and feeling sorry for myself in my head, but clearly you're listening because now I know you're listening. Okay, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, busted, you know. But, you know, they listen a lot, but I actually find the fact that they're able to hear everything that we think, to me, took some time to get used to, right? Because we like to have our little boundaries. I mean, even when somebody is in, even when you're living with somebody 30, 40 years, you don't tell them every single running thought in your head, right? But now all of a sudden it's telepathic communication, they can hear everything. And in a way, I found that there's actually that demands a certain amount of growth and comfort with yourself to learn that somebody sees every single thing about you you don't want anyone to see, right? But they can now see it, and they're still there. How fantastic is that? All the things that we think are so awful about us that we don't want anyone to see because they'd leave us, now all of a sudden our spouse in the spirit world can see all of that, and they're still here. Isn't that fantastic? Goes to show you, like, how, I don't know if my fiance would have stuck around while he was here, but he certainly stuck around now when he sees all these things, you know what I mean? So it goes to show you how much we are loved. To me, that is like such a message of love and acceptance, just absolute, complete acceptance that we think we can never really have on the planet because people are not really in their bodies wired like that, you know, and yet we have that complete acceptance from our loved ones in the spirit world. Isn't that marvelous? I think that's just marvelous, you know. And it really helps us then, I think, accept ourselves, right? If somebody we love accepts us like that, wholeheartedly, flaws, whiny little voices, everything, pity, poor me, everything that goes on that we never would want anyone to hear about, they hear it and they think, it's okay. I mean, could you be more accepted than that? I think it's wonderful. Anyway, smells. Lavender. My mother loved lavender. I used to smell lavender all the time, and my mother, you know. So sometimes you'll get a smell. Now the smell will usually have some association to them, you know, so it'll be something you associate with them. Always, they're not just trying to make things difficult for you and make you go run around guessing, like, is that me or is it not me? They're actually genuinely trying to let you know, I'm here, I love you, I'm here, I'm still here. So they're not trying to make things cryptic. They're trying to show you there's associations. They're picking things very carefully. So if you get a smell that's like, for my mother, lavender, I know that's my mother. You know, if I smell something else, I wouldn't associate with anyone, you know, but so these should be some association with them. And sometimes you'll hear just a word, you know, a real giveaway is if something pops into your head and it interrupts your thoughts, you know, like if you're just monkey mind, as the Buddhists say, you're just monkey mind, the way we always monkey mind. It's the nature of our brain to have a monkey mind. It's always just nattering away there in the background. And then all of a sudden the thought pops in as clear as day and interrupts you. You know that came from somebody else, right? Yeah, so pay attention to that because that's a dead giveaway, you know. People say, oh, if it's them, you hear them in their accent. I don't know why I'd hear them in their accent. My fiance was German. I never hear him in his accent. I've heard some German words that I've had to go look up, but I really think he used them to get my, it was never an easy person to get through to. So I would hear a German word and I would know it wasn't for me, right? Because I didn't even know what it was. So he doesn't do it anymore. But at the beginning, when I was having to get, this is why I understand how hard this is, because believe me, I was like the worst pupil when it comes to trying to get a sign to in those early days. So, but pay attention to those words. You know, if it just kind of drifts in like your ordinary thought, probably just you remembering something. But if it's clear like that, it's going to be them, right? A lot of people will get electrical activity, things turning on, phone ringing, static, you know, things like that. That's very common. My fiance was an architectural designer, and he was like always, he had like 2-3 computer screens. He's always doing these designs, so he's really tech savvy. So I used to get a lot of tech things because that was just him, right? Because he's a tech guy. But if you got somebody who never had a phone, they're probably not calling you, right? They're going to do something else. They're going to choose some other way to get through to you. So all the time it comes back to, is that consistent with their character, whatever it may be. Does that make sense? And, you know, people say things get moved around. I can't say I've ever had stuff move around, but I have had people say that, you know, they put something here and disappeared, you know. I've never had it happen, so I can't really speak on it from any kind of experience. But, you know, if it's something that is very obvious, where it's like, she's not paying attention, I'm going to put this here, again, there will be some reason for it. You know, does that make sense? There'll be some reason for that particular thing having been moved. In other words, it'll have, again, some relevance to them, their character, or to your relationship or something or other, you know. I mean, if you put your umbrella down and then you find it in the bathroom, you know, you probably did that yourself, right? But I'm always doing things like that. I put things down, I forget where I put them, you know. So maybe people move them around and I just assumed it was me. But there should be some resonance. In all of these things, there should be some resonance. That's the key. And the more you develop your intuition, and the more you learn to trust your intuition and listen to your intuition, the more you'll notice the resonance in these things, and you'll be surprised how often they're actually trying to communicate with you that maybe you missed. You know, so it really comes back to being, it all comes from there. It's the language of the spirit. One thing I kind of mentioned earlier was synchronicities. Very elaborate synchronicity. You know, synchronicity is what they call a meaningful coincidence. I get those all the time. Really elaborate synchronicities, you know. And so if you find that this led to this, led to this, and oh boy, I've got an answer to a question I had, believe me, that was somebody orchestrating all of that for you. Synchronicities can be very, very simple as well, you know. You can just meet somebody who knows somebody else who can help you with something. Again, these are synchronicities. It's just anything that turns out, if you ask for help, particularly the key again is ask for help. If you ask for help and then suddenly a week later, a series of events or 2 or 3 events stack up that seem coincidental, that help you, you know somebody, that's a synchronicity, and somebody heard you and helped you. People often have it kind of weird area, and this is kind of the last one that I'll go into, is before we do some Q&A. Actually, I've talked for a lot longer than I thought, so I hope you can all stay. Is clairvoyant premonitions, where you see something and in your mind's eye, or you have a premonition about something. That one I'm not so sure about, because we can psychically have our own premonitions. So I get these all the time, but I don't believe they're from the spirit world. I feel they're just, because I have a psychic faculty, it's fairly developed at this point, able to see them. But I would say, regardless, if you have a premonition, listen to it. Now, the key is knowing the difference between premonition and paranoia, right? So that's something that we just have to develop our intuition to learn and understand. But I can honestly say, if you have a bad feeling about something, listen to it. If you've got a good feeling about something, listen to it. I mean, don't go nuts, right? But like, don't go, oh, I think I've got 6 numbers for the lottery. Let me sell my house and buy a load of tickets. I mean, we don't want to do anything stupid, but if you've got a strong feeling, listen to it. If you've got one way or the other. And the other thing I will say, and this again comes back to what we run into with other people in this situation, is if somebody is saying something to you that sounds wrong, trust your intuition, it's wrong, right? You need to listen to yourself, not other people. Who are they? I mean, I'm sharing with you my experience, and you can take it or leave it, and I'm offering it to you to help. And if it resonates with you, listen, and if it doesn't, don't. Or if some of it does, listen, and if some of it doesn't, don't. The bottom line is that the only way to safely navigate this terrain is to trust your own intuition. You know, if somebody says something to you that sounds wrong, it is wrong, right? So that's really that. The couple of things I will leave you with is just that signs should have some bearing on them. So it's like, there's no point in getting a book and looking at, I mean, you can get a book and look up like all the different signs just to see what happens. I'm hoping I've never seen the things I've gotten in a book. You know, I've just had to learn over time to recognize these synchronicities and, you know, different things. But the thing is that ask for a sign. This is your loved one. They know you better than anybody. You know them better than anybody. The relationship is between you and them, not between you and some other third person or somebody who wrote a book, right? So what you need to do is, when you were with them here on the planet, you worked on your relationship, right? And other than the spirit world, what do? You work on your relationship, right? That's what you do. And you learn together. You will learn much more by working with your loved one, taking these baby steps over time, being patient to start to recognize. They will draw if they want you to see something, they will draw your attention there, right? Your job is to just learn to trust your intuition, right? And then you trust them already, you love them already, and then let them do their part, but that's your part. And then the signs that you see, like that hummingbird, like whatever, they will start. You will go, like all my 100 butterflies, you know, one butterfly would have meant nothing, but 100, certainly I knew who that was, you know? So that's really, I think, really covered most of it. Again, you know, I've just kind of given you, I feel like I've given you a bunch of possibilities for signs, which is like me reading the Dream Book Dictionary, but I really do want to stress in that is that it should resonate. Resonance is the key to recognizing a sign.